sola bandera y hagamos un universo.
Hagamos un universo con una sola bandera, con una sola bandera. Hagamos un universo.
Que vengan las primaveras con claveles y violetas, con claveles y violetas, y que caigan las fronteras, más unidos que nunca, con dignidad. Ayudemos al hermano en solidaridad, más unidos que nunca, en un latido se levanta entero el mundo unido.
Greetings again and welcome. Bienvenidos. My name is John Fanistil. I'm the Executive Director at VIA International, and along with the rest of the VIA International staff, we welcome you to this episode of Las Noticias from the Border, News desde la Frontera. Today, my guests are Paul Espinosa and Guadalupe Correa-Cabrera, and I'm going to ask them each briefly to just introduce themselves by answering the question, ¿Qué hay de nuevo? What are they working on? And then I'll look forward to discussing with them especially what they're seeing in social movements is the theme of today, as we look and read in our newspapers of the so many different kinds of social movements that are roiling our life together. But first, I'm just going to welcome our guests and give them a chance to introduce themselves to you. I'm going to start with Paul Espinosa. Paul is an award-winning filmmaker and president of Espinosa Productions, a San Diego-based production company specializing in Latino and U.S.-Mexico border topics. For over 40 years, Paul has produced, directed, and written numerous films for PBS and for festivals around the world. He's professor emeritus in the School of Transborder Studies at Arizona State University. And his current production is Singing Our Way to Freedom, a multi-layered portrait of San Diego's own Ramon Chunky Sanchez. So will you join me with a round of applause as we welcome Paul Espinosa to Las Noticias from the Border. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, John. Really happy to be here.
¿Qué hay de nuevo? What are you working on? Tell us what's keeping you busy these days?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate, and congratulations on this program, which I think is sorely needed. Well, primarily, several things. One is that I've been very involved for many years with the San Diego Latino Film Festival. I was one of the founding members of the Media Arts Center of San Diego, which basically was the host of the San Diego Latino Film Festival. And of course, in these trying times of COVID, we had to cancel last year's festival, which was supposed to start on March the 12th. In fact, we canceled it the day that it was supposed to start, which was really very disappointing, both to us and to all the people that I think wanted to see it. This was it would have been the 27th annual festival. We have been able to sort of rescue it, in quotes, for a virtual festival, which actually starts this week, September 17th through the 27th. If you're interested, if you just Google San Diego Latino Film Festival, you can find the festival. There'll be not as many films as we had when we had the virtual festival, but quite a few films from all over Latin America as well as the United States. So that's one thing I've been involved with. And
Paul, before you go on to the next one, let me just ask quickly about that. Do you, as a filmmaker, do you dedicate a lot of your time to watching other people's work, other films? How do you manage to do that? Get your own work done while watching so many wonderful films?
Well, I mean, I try to watch, as much as I can. I mean, obviously a film festival. I mean, one of the really unique things about a film festival like this is that this is really a very special opportunity to see films that unfortunately you really won't see anyplace else. I mean, you're not going to see these films of course, we're not going to see any films right now, given the current state of, I mean, theaters technically are open, but I think people are really not going back to theaters yet. But these are films that you really won't see anyplace else. So it's a real special opportunity. I try to see, as much as I can. Of course, I have limited time in terms of, what I'm able to do. But it's always interesting to see what other people are doing, how they're approaching, different subject matter, especially if it's something that I might be familiar with or have, maybe covered myself in the past. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot of really wonderful films.
Is there any single film in particular in this year's festival that you would especially recommend, or that you especially enjoyed yourself?
Well, of course, I haven't seen all these films. I mean, I'm actually not. This festival is actually curated by one of our staff members at the Media Arts Center, Moises Esparza, gotcha. And Ethan Vantilo, who's the director of the Media Arts Center. So basically, I mean, I have seen a few of these films because a few of them are films that have been around. There's actually some very nice films of Lourdes Portillo, who's a filmmaker from the Bay Area, who's done has a huge body of work, and there's several of her films, After the Earthquake and The Devil Never Sleeps, that are both wonderful films that are going to be on. A documentary about Raul Julia that actually was on PBS not too long ago. A documentary called Radio Silence about Carmen Arestegui, who's a Mexican journalist who's had quite a fight with the authorities over her just ability to tell stories in Mexico, and others. There's a new feature film, La Llorona, sort of taking the La Llorona story and transposing it to Guatemala, and sort of during the time of the genocide. That's a feature film, and another feature film from Guatemala called Neba. Neba is a Guatemalan community, indigenous community that also suffered very badly during the genocide. This is in the 1980s. And this is, again, is a feature film about that story. So great. I would definitely encourage people to just go check out the website, and you can see what's there. You can pre-order films. Basically, again, it's a virtual festival. So the festival they're all scheduled, and you can see that during the time they're scheduled, you can start the film, and then you have 24 hours to finish the film. So wonderful. Anyway, that's definitely something that I would, it's a real unique opportunity. And actually, I don't know how widespread this will get, but you don't have to be in San Diego, obviously, to see this. This is going to be online. So this is a festival that people can see all over. Great. That maybe just transposes quickly to, I've actually been doing, I will be doing screenings of the Singing Our Way to Freedom, the documentary on Chunky Sanchez that I produced a number of years ago, and am continuing to screen it at virtual festivals and university screenings, and some of those are also coming up. We have one with actually with City College at the end of this month, also with the Gainesville Latino Film Festival in Gainesville, Florida, the end of this month, and some other screenings coming up. We do have a website, chunkyfilm.com, and if you go there, we try to update it as much as possible about where people can see upcoming things about the film. But we're still very proud about all the work that went into this film and the opportunity to sort of showcase it to new audiences. Great, wonderful. Well, thank you. And yeah, we'll be sure to post those links to our page and spread the word. And again, Paul, we so appreciate your being here with us. I look forward to hearing more about your thoughts about the Chicano rights movement and echoes of that in today's landscape. But let me turn now to our other guest, Guadalupe Correa-Cabrera. And Guadalupe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm honored to be invited. I love to talk about the border and with people at the border. I lived at the border for 8 years in Brownsville, Texas, and I was considered myself a borderlander. And right now I live in Washington, D.C., which, it takes me away from the border a little bit. So right now I'm an associate professor at the university, at the George Mason University. And I am doing different type of projects. My main two projects, and this is very interesting that you invited me to talk about social movements, because I used to study the border security issues, organized crime, issues on immigration, in Central America, and the flows from Central America to the United States, its connection with human trafficking networks and criminal organizations. So everything that had to do with illicit networks. That has been my work in the past 10 years, I would say. But in 2018, my life changed a lot with the arrival of the migrant caravans in Tijuana, and my observation of this phenomenon as something that I had never seen before. And so I started to study the groups that were involved organization of Caravans, a caravan itself, and I started to understand these social movements. So now I mean, I think that I have a project for life, at least for the next 10 years, and I would like to become an expert in social movements. I have, you know, I have imagined a book that it's going to take me probably 6 years to theorize new social movements in general, starting to understand the migrant caravans, the Native American movement of Standing Rock in North Dakota, and also what is happening right now with the Mapuches in Chile, and also the mobilization in Hong Kong, utilizing counterinsurgency perspectives and military literature. Is a very controversial way to try to understand social mobilization, also with the utilization of new technologies. So I would like to come up, theoretically speaking, with a new way to understand the new mobilizations, because there is an organic and spontaneous and very, I mean, you know, very legitimate way to understand it, the legitimate causes, but there is the manipulation of these social mobilizations for the purposes of those who have ruled our world. And this is something that really interests me, the connection between these movements and energy, the energy sector, and, you know, energy companies, and that is very complex. So yes. I get very excited when I talk about this, but well, at the same time, I'm writing a book with a colleague of mine. We had traveled a couple of times along the border, and we did it last year. And so we put together a proposal to write a book on the whole Mexico-US border. We crossed all the, all the border crossings that we could cross, not the ones that we could not cross. And we're writing this book that is going to be finished next year. We got like a contract, so we're very happy. Unfortunately, we were planning to do another trip, and we will do it at some point, but I don't know if we will be able to write the book with that trip post-COVID. Yeah. And this is the other project that really makes me very happy. And I have a lot of projects that are connected with illicit networks and my previous work. This is what I right
yeah,
now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Yes, I did select the theme of movements because I was familiar a little bit just with your work, having been introduced to your work by our mutual friend, Jim Gerber. And then I've known Paul from a distance across many years, but have gotten to see many of his films. And I thought the theme of movements would be of interest because, of course, here in the United States, we read our newspapers and we hear principally these days about movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, or the movement to remove Confederate statues across the public landscape of our country. But I'm interested, Paul, to hear from your perspective, when you look at the social justice movements in the United States today, in Guadalupe, I definitely want to come back to Caravans, very interested to hear more. But as you look at the social justice movements in the United States today, Paul, what do you see that looks familiar to the civil rights movement of the Chicano rights movement, or earlier generations of movements that you've chronicled in your work? And what do you see that maybe strikes you as novel or something unexpected that you see when you read the newspaper these days?
Well, I guess, I don't know, that's a big question, but basically, I think certainly one of the things that I think has always been important in social movements is young people, basically. Students in particular, but young people who are, I think, in general, quicker to understand, quicker to act, and quicker to understand maybe what the stakes are. The stakes in their lives, I think, are very clear about, you know, I don't know, all kinds of justice issues that we see all over the country. So certainly I see a lot of young people, especially talking specifically about the Latino community. I think lots and lots of young people, and not just exclusively in the Latino community, but obviously, you know, coalescing. I think one of the things that I think is very noteworthy is the kind of inter-ethnic and sort of broad mobilization of lots of different people who are very concerned about some of the very terrible things that are going on in our country right now, both respect to, you know, immigration, with respect to detention along the border, with respect to, you know, asylum. I mean, all kinds of things that really are, you know, just terrible, basically. And I think that people see the need for demanding change of one sort or another. I think you also see the level of state surveillance and state violence really has also really increased enormously. When I think back, I mean, basically, I've had the opportunity to sort of look at the U.S.-Mexico border through my films over a long period of time. One of my films is a series about the war between Mexico and the United States, the War of 1846 to 1848, that basically drew the border as we know it today. Films dealing with the Mexican Revolution period, and then films dealing, with different periods after that. So, the border has always been a site of violence, basically, in one way or another. Although I think today we're seeing a level of violence and a level of an attempt to basically sort of close off the border, in a way that's really very unnatural. I mean, basically, we live in a binational region or a transnational region, essentially. And I think we always have to keep in mind that we're talking about a region of people that have been moving back and forth for thousands of years, long before even any Europeans came here, but certainly in the last, 200 years, the last 100 years, tremendous amount of movement that, basically borders attempt to try to, forestall in one way or another. So I think that what I do feel is that the moment that we're in is definitely a very dynamic movement, one that calls for all of us to be involved in whatever way we can, because we are seeing sort of an effort to turn back the clock, so to speak, to some kind of earlier period that was, not a particularly happy period in terms of, ethnic relations. And so, hopefully we will, continue to see more of that. I know Guadalupe can talk about the caravans, but also the spontaneous movement of people that are very, very desperate for a variety of reasons, but often reasons having a lot to do with, what the United States has done in these different regions, as the classic line, we are here because you were there. Guatemala, El Salvador, Latin America in general. I mean, the kind of chaos that we've created over the last, half century has, the chickens are coming home to roost. So I think that we need to understand that we're in a larger sort of arc of history that is not going to be stopped by just, simple measures, basically.
Yeah, Paul, I'm struck as across my 20 years here, in the most recent 20 years, I was born and raised here, but was away for a while. But, this hardening of the border that you're talking about, the dramatic hardening of the San Diego-Tijuana border with walls, and especially with the buildup of Border Patrol agents. I've seen it over these 20 years that I've been, on the ground close up. Really, in my mind, I've kind of seen, in my view, it seems to me that the relations between local populations and San Diego Border Patrol have begun to mirror much more closely the relations between, say, urban populations in some of our large American cities and the local police department. So that if you're living in South County, San Diego, you're much more likely to run into a Border Patrol agent than you are to any other law enforcement official, the green uniforms, right? And the relations between local communities and those people in green uniforms are caught up with a lot of the tension that you see in the Black Lives Matter movement in major urban American cities, right? And I think I see a parallel between, for instance, the defund police and abolish ICE. Those are born from the same impulses of people frustrated with these law enforcement agencies over whom they have little accountability or transparency themselves as local residents. So that kind of the border has been so changed, at least here in San Diego, Tijuana, over the last 20 years with that rollout of force, a real display of force.
I mean, yeah, when you just look at the numbers of the increase in the Border Patrol over the last 20 years, 25 years is just phenomenal. So I think what we're seeing this is also a larger thread in American society, which is basically an increase, the whole militarization of our society and the kind of resources that we are spending, the United States, in enforcement, not just on the border, but all over the world. I mean, we have something like, 800 bases all over the world. The kind of budget that the Defense Department has, gets increases of billions of dollars every year. We spend, untold billions on planes that don't even fly. And we get, and then we also see this military hardware come back to our local police departments and our Border Patrol to basically, you use this technology someplace, right? Without any you know, I mean, this is one of the most, in my opinion, the growth of the military-industrial complex is one of the biggest issues that we need to confront, that we need to be more aware of. You know, we're obviously aware of lots of things, but you know, every American is spending, I forget how much, but you know, 30 cents out of every dollar that we spend for taxes goes to this militarization, which is, you know, really, really outrageous, especially when we look at what's happening with our schools, what's happening in our hospitals, what's happening to our public infrastructure, to our, you know, highways. I mean, our whole public domain is suffering because we have, you know, we're allocating these resources oftentimes, you know, sometimes without even the public being that aware of it. You know, we have supposedly public officials that we elect to make choices, but you know, the military industrial complex has been very careful to make sure that, you know, they're putting money into the pockets of every single one of these districts so that these people, our elected representatives, find ways not to, you know, say, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Why are we, you know, spending all this money? So, and like I say, basically the border is sort of like a quote unquote convenient place to allocate these resources. And that's when you see the number, just the number of Border Patrol agents, I think it's, you know, it's more than quadruple just in the last 20 years. And I think we can see what the fence itself. I mean, I did a documentary, one of the first films really in the United States, a national film looking at undocumented lives, was done in 1987 in the shadow of the law, and it was a portrait of undocumented families. And we had lots of footage down at the border, and that was a so-called soccer field. I don't know if you remember that, but the soccer field. So basically, the border was really open. I mean, you could cross. It was dangerous, but you know, there wasn't a fence there basically. And now you go to that same place, and there's 3 fences there, right? And you know, what is it that we've accomplished? Well, we've spent, you know, millions and millions of dollars for this so-called security. With what effect? I mean, just you know, very, very misplaced resources, I would say.
Guadalupe, so Paul and I have been chatting mostly about the federal government of the United States as an actor, but you're really, your studies have focused on non-state actors especially. Am I right about that? And you mentioned your studies of criminal organizations in the past. Is that an area of?
Yes, that was that's the area that I have been studying, absolutely. But there's always a connection with state actors and in the end with corporations, you know, who benefits. This is what I have studied my whole life. Who benefits from movements, who benefits from, you know, repression. And in the end, this is what I always say, it's just the border military industrial complex. It's basically like a number of corporations that provide services to the state and decide and lobby who's going to be, you know, who's going to be earning the money, basically. And so I'm a little bit concerned. These social mobilizations that are very genuine, like Black Lives Matter, and you know, young people that want to change things. And the same thing, this movement against the construction of the border wall, the militarization of the border, you know, I have seen, and I'm very concerned because, and all this movement to open the borders, which is a genuine, if you're a liberal, like many of these businessmen are liberals just to allow the free mobility of goods, but not the free mobility of labor. You know, it's kind of like, you know, we want to move our goods, but not to allow people to work so they can maintain the salaries low. And it's kind of a big hypocrisy, but at the same time, the utilization of the images and, you know, the psychological operations that they do with actual to mobilizations, what has happened with all these movements of caravans or these movements to be against the construction of the fence or this border military industrial complex. What has happened? We have a closer border because there's this perception that those that are coming from the south are a big menace, a big threat against national security. And many people in the United States has become concerned about what's happening. I know this is a segment of the population. It's not the majority, but it consolidates, it legitimizes these type of actions. The same thing happens in Mexico, for example. You know, this utilization of social movements that are genuine by the state that would in the end benefit these corporations, the construction of more detention centers, of course, bringing more technology to the border and all that. That is the result of genuine movements, and that's very concerning. And I have seen these in so many places, like Hong Kong, for example, Hong Kong protests, Hong Kong movements for freedom, for political participation. What has happened? You have now a more repressive government, the Chinese government is not allowing, anybody to protest. The same thing, Portland and Minneapolis, it has, there's right now a segment of the population that perceive these movements as looters or radicals that are, that call for law and order. And that's really, really, really concerning. And we need to.
So is anybody else having Guadalupe freeze up on them a little bit?
Yeah, she just froze up.
Okay, I'm going to continue with you, Paul, and we'll hope that Guadalupe joins us again. Paul, I heard Guadalupe alluding to this, the kind of reaction to movements, right? That the organizing of young people. I want to get back to the theme of technology too, because I'm amazed at the way young people are using the technology these days to organize themselves. But these movements do inspire a counter reaction from authorities, and then also from other counter movements, if you will. What do you feel optimistic about the movements that you see, the social justice movements that you see around us today, or do you fear that they are eliciting just a greater and greater backlash?
Well, I mean, it's obviously clear that there is some kind of backlash, and there's also a very concerted political effort to utilize that, to weaponize that, which has been, I would say, relatively successful with some people. Again, I mean, it goes without saying that, we talk about how polarized we are as a society today, which of course we are. And, essentially there is some significant segment of the population who basically is part of this backlash and is very, concerned, very afraid of, these sorts of social movements. And to some extent, I mean, probably at any given time in history, some people, always there's going to be some opposition to certain kinds of social movements. There's lots of people who feel they have something to lose. On the other hand, like I say, the media, especially, going back to, the corporate interests that media have, basically they sort of, fan the flame, so to speak, of this, and definitely, and then of course, key players like, Fox News and other people like that, talk radio, just really, weaponize that in a way to really scare people. And again, I mean, lots of people in this country, have never even been outside of this country. I forget what the figure is, but some very significant number of Americans don't even have passports. They've never left the country. They have no idea of the world that we live in, the world that they live in, right? So they're I don't know, there's some people that are sort of easily frightened by anything that seems, foreign, to them. And we're such a big country also, we don't normally, come into contact with people from other countries, although now we do in a sense, because we are a sense a country of immigrants, right? We talk about that as a badge of honor. On the other hand, we're all too quickly to forget that, when we want to somehow, close the door, so to speak. So, I mean, there's obviously lots and lots that have been written about the closing door and the idea that, at different times, I mean, just looking at the US-Mexico border, at times when the economy is doing great, over the last 100 years, the border is very open. And then when the economy is not doing so well, the border gets closed. We have active, the repatriations of the 1930s during the that whole period, which is what the Lemon Grove incident deals with, my earlier film. Basically, we see this idea that somehow we can turn the faucet on of labor, basically, when we want it, which of course is, basically not really sort of understanding the regional, the transnational region that we live in. So, basically, I am concerned. I think anybody would have to be concerned about the way things are going these days and just the level of vitriol that we see out there in the public space.
And then Guadalupe was alluding to, as I understood her, alluding to this manipulation of images and this manipulation of perceptions of these movements of various kinds by many different people, of course. But I'm curious to know how you see things as a filmmaker and working in this new media environment. You mentioned that the San Diego Latino Film Festival is now online, and in some ways that's opened up new opportunities for people from afar to participate. How have you thought of yourself as a filmmaker? I think of it as a traditional medium in this new media environment. How's that been for you to watch the new media explode all around us these last few decades?
Well, I think it's very challenging. Basically, I mean, all the sort of social media, the Facebook and Instagram and other kinds of media, which I think maybe one of the things that Guadalupe was alluding to was the fact that the ability basically to essentially harness, to first off to consolidate images and feed images to people that already have certain prejudices. I mean, the whole thing that Facebook has almost an algorithm that knows who you are and basically feeds you more and more of the information that they think you're already interested in. So essentially you live in a bubble. You start to live in more and more of a bubble, because if that's your main source for information, that you only see images and information that reinforce the world that you already live in. And that's definitely highly concerning. I mean, I have to say, I mean, I've obviously been around making films for the last 40 years, and I can't say that I even understand, or I try to use social media somewhat more as a promotional vehicle. I do have a Facebook page, I do have an Instagram, but I'm not there that much. In fact, as a promotional vehicle, I'm not doing as good a job as I should, but I'm certainly very concerned about the fact that people are consuming a huge amount of images, and so many of those images are very, very calculated to produce certain kinds of responses. I think that's what Guadalupe was talking about. And of course, to basically create more and more fear. I mean, the idea of, which we've known for years, that, basically fear is a very powerful, emotion. And certainly we've seen, fascism over the whole last century. Fascism was very effective at creating fear and using fear very effectively to silence the population as much as they could. So we definitely are living in a moment like that today, and we have to be, have to be as involved as we can to try to do something about that.
Guadalupe, I was just asking Paul about the new media environment and how his work as a filmmaker, a traditional genre of filmmaking, has been changing. But I know that new media and new technology is a big part of your studies of, for instance, the Caravan. What do you see, how does this new media environment and the new technologies of digital communications change the way that social movements are forming and taking shape?
Well, that's why I am a little bit more concerned, because this is what I'm trying to study. I'm trying to study the messaging and how social movements are weaponized through messaging and through platforms. There's a very interesting book that somebody recommended me some years ago. It's Killing All Normies, Angela Nagel, how online cultures work. So how in certain platforms, it started with 4chan and Tumblr, the extreme left in Tumblr, the extreme right in 4chan, and how the messages and sentiments and a lot of symbols, connect with young people. Right now, I feel very, very far away from the language of young people, and how really this explains a lot some of the voters on the right and why Donald Trump won the election. If we know, for example, now, movement like QAnon, I cannot understand. I mean, in my age, I cannot understand how a group of people like of this magnitude believe in certain theories or conspiracies or ideas that are extremely difficult to prove or to sustain, right? Why an undocumented migrant would be a criminal or a raper, but they do believe that. And they believe other things that are, I cannot understand how that online culture has been ingrained in the new generations to the extent that it really has a very, very, very straightforward effect to make this more fascist movement and more repressive measures to be taken. That's why we have to be very careful. Like also in the extreme left, which is interesting, how the left or more, I don't want to talk about this in a way that I want to be like in center, because there's a lot of criticisms about people who want to be more centrist. But at the same time, polarizing so much the society. And this is where the book of Angela Nagel, Killing All Normies, and the understanding of online cultures work really well, because at some point you had this division and these movements in the left without participating, made the movements that would participate in the right, you know, make this effective, all these measures effective. So right now, a lot of discussion, a lot of the mobilization of the right and of the left are taking place in the social media.
Yeah.
Us not able to, I mean, you know, with the lack of possibilities of having a more civilized discourse or conversation. It's very worrisome. I don't understand.
Yeah, I was struck back 2 years ago, 2018, when the first waves of the caravan, when that large caravan or the so-called caravan determined to come to San Diego, Tijuana. You know, historically, most Central American, large groups of migrants from Central America have gone not to San Diego, Tijuana, but to the Texas border, which is of course so much closer. But when those large numbers of people in the fall of 2018 chose to come to San Diego, Tijuana, many of them chose to come to the beach where the border wall dives into the ocean to kind of celebrate their arrival in Tijuana. And I was struck just chatting with a few folks in those period, how many of them were really connected by WhatsApp, that they were traveling not necessarily physically together, but they were traveling together with their cell phones. You know, the cell phone was the thing that kept them connected to the larger. So there was a kind of a back end digital infrastructure, I would say, to the caravan, and then also then social or public outward looking presentation of the caravan, which, as you say, was so subject to manipulation by so many different people who tried to paint the caravan as this or paint the caravan as that, you know, and that basically become Donald Trump's mid 2018 election campaign platform was "Stop the Caravan, they're coming to invade America." So, but have you studied the kind of the inner workings of the caravan and the use of these technologies, WhatsApp, and for the connections and organizing of the caravans themselves?
The caravans, like other social movements, of course, it's very, very, very interesting how, yes, WhatsApp was the way to organize the members of the caravan, but the organizers have different hashtags on Facebook to mobilize their own, you know, their own groups to cover the caravan, and it was kind of a massive social movement that had very legitimate causes, that had very legitimate reasons. Many people that were really escaping from violence or were escaping a condition of extreme poverty in their countries. Many of those situations, of course, the United States had a lot to do with that during last century, and the civil wars and the involvement and the intervention during the Cold War. We all know that, and it's very legitimate. But at the same time, you know, people go there. Why this big caravan took place exactly at this moment? Who was organizing these people? Who was providing the symbols? Is this really a social movement for the people, or is for the United States public to see that there is really a humanitarian crisis at the border, humanitarian the way that they understand humanitarian? Because you know that this word was not, was Trump's word, right? The humanitarian is like, there is a lot of humans, you know, that it will invade this country. And that's very interesting. I mean, you move people to a place where they will not be able to enter. Why to Tijuana? If they, why in Caravan? Why making themselves accessible to generate this sense of, yes, for some public in the United States, they are poor, they understand exactly the root causes of this migration. But for some others, which is what really helped, what do we have now? What are the results of the caravans? Not only one caravan. After that, many more caravans arrived, and we started to study the messaging. And the message was not necessarily great, because there was involvement of human smugglers, of all kind of people that really wanted to benefit from those that wanted to go to the United States. The commodification of undocumented migrants by everybody, by journalists, by intellectuals, by activists or so-called activists was atrocious. And they also utilize the same means to say, okay, I'm helping or I'm covering, but I'm going to get an award for taking this picture. And what do we have now? What is the reality of this? Well, the United States finished with with the asylum process. That's the real end. I mean, and that's very counterintuitive, because we want something. We want to support a freer movement people, a more liberal world and a freer world. But what is the result? How their players that are in power have taken this in order to really legitimize the actions, the preconceived notions of what security should be. But yes, I mean, we study all that, and what we see is not necessarily very positive. Through WhatsApp, through the messages that we see, many actors participate. It's not a movement just of the people. You see a lot of smugglers, criminals, and people that make use of those platforms to say, hey, you can come to this shelter, which is not really a shelter, or I can provide you with a form for you to come here, but you have to pay me more money. It's not just the caravan. So we have to go beyond the messages that go with our ideas.
So as we reach the time of closing, I want to perhaps just ask a simple question that you can share as much as, or as little as you'd like. But I am struck by the changed media environment and the changed technology environment in which we are all, of course, living. I think we're living through a technological revolution. I mean, Paul, I was active in the Central American peace movement of the 1980s, and you remember those days. It was flyers and snail mail and phone trees and this very primitive technology by which these earlier generations of movements organized themselves. And now in this new environment, things happen so quickly, in such a viral and as Guadalupe is saying, in ways that are open to manipulation and or distortion by different actors. How do you keep your heads on straight? Let me just ask, what are you reading these days? Where do you go for your news? If you recommend, where do you go for your news? How do you consume media? Let me ask that as a closing question before we sign off, just so maybe others of our listeners will benefit from what you're learning these days. Where do you go for your news these days, Paul?
Well, I mean, yeah, right. There's so much. I mean, basically, I read the New York Times pretty regularly. I read the Washington Post. I read here in San Diego. I read Voice of San Diego, which I think does a pretty good job of covering what's happening locally. I read KPBS, the online thing, which has I think pretty timely stories, basically. I read, of course, through I end up reading things in the Atlantic. I read sort of the national publications that get visibility. I try to read some, Truth Out is another, Truth Out in These Times, which I think is a very good publication. People that are doing more, in-depth reporting on certain things. But, it's tremendously hard to keep up. There's just, I feel like we're living in an information tsunami. There's so much happening, like on any given day, half the time I don't even have a chance to read anything. I have two grandsons who actually are here today, and I can hear them in the background ready to, I have to go and soon and do something with all the energy they have. They're 6 and 8. But anyway, just keeping up with what's going on is like a big challenge. You just try to stay informed. I listen to the News Hour, the PBS News Hour, which I think is still a relatively good, sort of neutral source of information, especially international news, which again, so much, we're so incredibly ignorant, we in the United States, about what's happening in the rest of the world. It's just pathetic, basically. So anyway, that's some of what I look at.
Good. And you mentioned the San Diego Latino Film Festival. Is there another place that you go to find out what filmmakers are thinking? Is there a platform or a website or a association where you think creative filmmakers are stirring the pot?
Oh God, I don't know even what I would say. There's so many places where, there's, film festivals, I think, again, there's every week there's a film festival happening someplace. Again, that COVID has really changed our situation a lot.
Yeah.
But I think film festivals are tremendous places to see, especially new work. For sure, there are going to be some great films on the Caravan. I don't know how, it'd be good for Guadalupe to take a look at those and see, but I know for sure there are people, for instance, that were with the Caravan over the course of their movement that, were sort of documenting on the ground, different people in that. And and unfortunately those films will probably take a while to come out, but certainly films, I think there's a lot of interest in documentary film. There's a lot of fantastic films being done in Mexico. and by Latin Americans, you know, about, I mean, the documentary work in Mexico is just tremendous. I'm really, really impressed with it. And also here in the United States, I mean, so many young people are, you know, first off, you can make a film much more easily. You can film stuff, you know, so people really are doing lots of stuff. There's a lot of short films that are going to be presented in the film festival this coming week. So I hope people can take advantage of that. Again, just another perspective on things that maybe we can't show anyplace else.
Good. Well, and Guadalupe, tell us, where do you turn to for your news and media these days?
Well, I mean, that is a great question. I think I changed a lot in 2018. So I used to read the more conventional media outlets, and I think sometimes it's very manipulated because there's kind of like just one message, and, you know, even critical media outlets. So I do feel, and it's overwhelming. I am in Twitter all the time. I want to see the different views and perspectives of people. And I will be very honest with you. I am right now trying to understand the right wing. So I'm trying to see what Laura Ingraham says, how she, it's messaging, it's very, very important. So I need to understand how the right works. So I try to focus right now of how the persons who don't think like me think. And also there's another thing that I discovered lately. The videos, like, you know, that young people do a lot of streaming and they have like their platforms where they, the radio stations that are, what is the name of the podcasts? Yes. Podcasts of young people that are very interesting and people that are very wise, are on conventional media platforms, but they do political analysis in a way that is very sophisticated. So right now I'm changing. I don't like so much of the traditional media outlets. I do read them, but I'm also trying to understand the right, to see what is going on here, what do they do, what they are saying, what they are talking about, because it's part of the way that I will understand the social movements now. And this new stream, well, all these videos, and I always send my father like videos of these young people, like, look at this video, whatever. That's, you know, the very interesting information.
Yeah, and is there a Mexican news source that you think of as a go-to for Spanish speakers and Spanish readers, or what Mexican news do you rely on most deeply or ongoingly? Is there a Mexican news outlet that you would recommend?
Well, we have, the problem is with traditional media. We have the so-called right-wing media outlets that I used to read, like Proceso magazine or La Jornada magazine, but it have become so traditional. And at the same time, right? And we have the traditional media outlets in Mexico. I look at them, but as I say, right now, I mean, I don't want to say which people that they're not very traditional. They are Mexican young people or commentators that use their own platforms to talk about their ideas. But, you know, something that I really like right now, I don't. I try to learn from everybody.
Understood. Well, very good. Well, let me I'm going to just say thank you. Others in our Zoom gathering will join me in thanking you, Paul Espinosa, Guadalupe Correa-Cabrera, for being our guests today. Next week on this program, we'll have Jason Wells, the Executive Director of the San Isidro Chamber of Commerce, and Ana Teresa Fernandez, a visual artist who's done work on both sides of the border wall here between San Diego and Tijuana, will be our guests. And I'm going to sign off for now. For those of you who are in the Zoom meeting, if you'd like to stay on, we'll squeeze in one or two more questions with Paul and Guadalupe. But for now, I'm going to sign off to our friends on Facebook and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining us. This is Las Noticias from the Border, news desde la frontera.
Más unidos que nunca, en un latido se